Mamta. Thanks, Mr. Pugaya, for joining us. And before our this panel, in fact, we had a very engaging conversation earlier to discuss various items. So I'm sure we will be able to touch most of them that we have discussed before. Now, for the audience, I think I have come and presented on variety of topics touching the digital media. And today we are taking one other interesting topic, which is the global takedown. Before we talk about global takedown, I think we just need to focus on what do you mean by takedown? What is the scope of today's presentation? So let me just do the scoping so that all the participants are well aware of the topics that are going to be covered and the questions also can be directed accordingly. In one of our earlier sessions, we discussed about curated content platforms where a publisher presents content, for example the OTT platforms, the content platforms that all of us have been enjoying during the lockdown. So we discuss several items in terms of the content regulation, takedown, etc. during that session. That time I had specifically said that we are not going to cover the UGC content, which is the user generated content. Now today we are going to focus on that item, which is the user generated content. When we talk about user generated content, we mean by the fact that there are technology platforms available. I will not take names on this particular session and request all the panel members also not to take any specific names. But all of you are aware which technology platforms we are talking about. So these are platforms where you and I can go and voice our opinion on a particular subject, post photos, share ideas, exchange ideas, debate, on various topics freely. We exercise our freedom of speech and expression on these platforms. Now, there are, when you talk about, so these are called intermediate. Arushi will build that in more detail, but just to summarize that these are not the publishers as differentiated with the content providers that we discussed in the earlier session. The second item that from a scoping perspective, I want to sort of clarify in this session, we are going to focus more on the intermediary platforms that are taking your and my voice to the public. We are not going to discuss about cloud providers and other technology platforms which are one level behind these, platforms, social media platforms. Because when you discuss the definition of intermediary, you do have ISPs, you have cloud providers, payment providers also coming in, and of course some of the provisions that we discussed do apply to them, but I think the government also has realized that there needs to be a distinction made between the social media platforms and the other intermediary platforms which work behind the social media platforms, or they may be providing intermediary services for variety of other reasons. So in fact, government is trying to even distinguish them is what we understand, and come out with different guidelines applicable to these two separate platforms. And that's why today's discussion is going to be on the social media platforms and the rules applicable to them. Now coming to the specific issues, I think the world has witnessed fake news issues, democratic elections being, allegedly, sort of taken over through the social media platforms, objectionable content such as child pornography, which is of great concern, and we may have a separate session on that. Copyright issues, when that there is piracy, etc., happening in the digital world. So all these items are possible that these are happening on the social media platforms. In that context, if they are, sort of available on the social media platform, then next what? Because if you compare that with traditional media, whether it is books, whether it is newspapers, television shows, they come and go, they don't stay. The ability for the content to continuously be available on these platforms and being easily re-forwarded makes this platform somewhat different than the other platforms that we have witnessed before, and therefore probably different way to look at it, though the same principles that we have exercised for the other mediums may continue to apply in terms of freedom of speech, etc. But from an implementation perspective, what are the things that will be different is probably also that's something we may end up discussing during this session. We have good fortune of having Mr. Puvaya here, and we are going to debate on a couple of cases that have that couple of them are pending, couple of them have already been decided by the Supreme Court, and an impact of that and interpretation of that as well during this conversation. Uh, Now, coming to the basics, I think Arushi, you have dealt with several of these issues, whether it is 69A, 79, I'm sure you will discuss those, but just few takeaways from our experience in enforcing, rather, the enforcement mechanism being made available for like asking the social media platforms to take down content. I'm assuming that the audience is at least aware of the basics out there, but if you want to go back to basics for a couple of points, please go ahead and do that.
So, thanks, Gauri. I think I'll deal with the question, but let me spend a minute on what 69A and 79 really talk about, because we're going to keep repeating these section numbers a lot as we speak. So, for those who probably are not aware, under the Information Technology Act, there are two key provisions that are used for the purpose of takedown, and that's section 69A and 79. What are these provisions and why are they used for the purpose of takedown? And what's the difference between them? So jumping quickly onto it, if you look at 69A, under 69A, the central government or an or an authorized officer can give a direction to for the purpose of takedown. What is the type of content that can be taken down is also specified in the section, and there are very limited grounds only. These grounds are content which basically is against the interest of the sovereignty of India, integrity, defense, public order, friendly relations, or for the commission of any cognizable offense relating to above. So these are only handful of grounds, very grave grounds, and rightfully so, because these are, these grounds are in the takedown for these purposes are in the absolute interest of the country. If you actually look at it, these grounds are similar to the ones which are under 19(2) of the Constitution of India, which is reasonable restrictions on freedom of speech. If you uh, match the two provisions, in fact, 19(2) is much wider because it includes, certain other additional grounds such as decency, public morality, contempt of court, etc. But as far as 69A is concerned, grounds are limited, and if the intermediary does not comply with it, that is the takedown order, there could be a penalty which could go up to 7 years of imprisonment and fine. So there is an absolute, compliance that is mandated by this particular section. Now, it isn't the case that, just because a government, body issues a takedown order, the intermediary has to take down the content on that basis. 69A is also supported by what we know as the blocking rules, which has a very detailed process of sort in terms of how content is taken down. Now, which requires that a designated officer under rule has to give a notice with respect to the content to be taken down. This notice can be given to the person whose content is in question or to the intermediary. So it is both. And please catch on to these words and hold on to the word, because I'm sure that we are going to debate about this. So when the notice is given, the person or the intermediary basically has the right to appear, defend, even seek clarification before a commission, which finally decides on the takedown, whether takedown is to be done or not to be done. And the gap between this is supposed to be at least 48 hours. So there's a reasonable time period here which is contemplated, during which a person can, appear before the commission and, present the case. Now, some of the things that we have uh, coming to your specific question, Gauri, some of the things that we've noticed is that, at times while the government does want compliances, at times the notice does not even say that this is a 69 notice. That becomes a principal issue, because I'm just going to deal with section 79, in a couple of minutes. But if there is a provision which requires which has a penalty provision, which has an imprisonment related, provision attached to it, if you don't specify, then it becomes ambiguous whether it's a 69A notice or a 79 notice. The second aspect is, at times the notice is basically, the takedown notice is just issued to maybe an Indian entity of an intermediary. Now we know, all of us know for a fact that, intermediaries may have Indian entities which may be marketing or support offices, but they are not the content regulating entities at the same time. So in such cases, what do you do? Do you comply, or do you say that you have constructive notice of the, now, or do you write back to the ministry or the government authority and say that no, we are actually not the correct body who, or the correct entity who should have received the notice? Then other point is that 69A, if you read it with Shreya Singh's case, it requires that the reasoning for takedown should be set out in the notice itself. The grounds. So, for example, like I gave you the grounds, right? Things like terrorism or offenses, like for example, the ones which hurt religious sentiments or which are against the nation in general, right of self-determination related posts, etc. These are the ones grave offenses that qualify. But if you sometimes government just sends a link and doesn't even call out what is the note, what is the real sometimes just a profile is sent and the profile may be kosher, but maybe one or two links in that may fall foul of 69A. So that's also not identified. These become some real on ground issues in terms of compliances. So that's 69A related issues. Some of them are common for 79, but quickly touching on 79. 79, as we all know, is some sort of a safe harbor provision for the intermediaries. So as long as intermediaries are doing complying with the due diligence requirements, and they are following the provisions of the intermediary guidelines, they are safe in the sense that when there is a order which is given to them by the court or by a government authority, they take down content, they fall under the safe harbor provisions. If they don't, they get exposed to liability as a publisher. They could get exposed to liability as a publisher of the content. So these are, two key provisions that are typically invoked for the purpose of takedown. And the issues always are that even for 79, for instance, identification of the real offense or why you request a takedown is really not done, which basically makes the intermediary grapple a little. And under 79A, there it is not followed by something like the blocking rules I was discussing for 69A, for example, where you can go and appear before a commission and have a discussion. So if the intermediary doesn't really agree with the takedown request, it's left with little choices but to at that point in time approach the court. So that's also a gap from an enforcement perspective.
Sure. So that's very helpful. And since you mentioned 79, I think Alipak, you can come in here. And while 69A, as Arushi rightly pointed out, calls out for the grounds on which the content could be ordered to be blocked. And I'm using these words is because different terms have been used in section 69A and 79. 69A talks about blocking, 79 talks about take down or disable access. So I'm going to deal with that point slightly later. But Alipak, why don't you explain what did Shreya Singhal judgment deal with when they discussed 79?
So I think thanks for that, Gauri. So Shreya Singhal, as we all know, is a landmark case decided by the Supreme Court in 2015. I'll briefly touch on the point of 79, and Mr. Puvaya will further elaborate that in today's discussion. Now, in the context of 79, the principal argument by the petitioner was that the intermediary guidelines and Section 79 they violate the Constitution insofar as they allow an intermediary, as opposed to a court or a statute, the discretion to decide upon whether an unlawful act is being committed or restricting the restricted content being published. And the second limb of argument was that the restriction under these rules go beyond the permitted restriction available under Article 19(2) of the Constitution. Now, the Supreme Court held that Section 73(3) subclause B, which is the provision which we are discussing, read with Rule 3 subclause 4 of the intermediary guidelines, are to be read down to mean that intermediary must receive a court order stroke notification from a government agency requiring the intermediary to remove specific information, and that would constitute actual knowledge stipulated in the provision. So there are two key aspects which deserve consideration. One is a court order, and number two, it has to be a very specific information. And this all ties back to what Arushi was discussing short while back. And the court observed that otherwise it would be very difficult for intermediaries where they receive millions of requests to decide what is to be acted upon and what not. And on this basis, Supreme Court said that this would not fall foul of the Constitution.
Thanks, Alipak. So taking, cue Arush and Alipak said, Mr. Puvaya, I have two questions for you, which I'll take in, one after the other. The first question, as we have seen in the process, that when you talk about Article 19.2, some specific grounds have been laid down and which say that on this, a reasonable restriction on freedom of speech can be imposed. However, now there is a lot of subjectivity if we really see when we talk about decency, morality, or even public order issues and the like. But you will see that even Shreya Singhal recognizes, and so does the statute, that an administrative body, which is not really a judicial mechanism through which the determination has been done, is actually imposing a takedown or a blocking. Do you see some gap here in terms of how should a freedom of speech and expression could be curtailed only through a judicial mechanism, or is administrative mechanism okay, and if so, what should be the safeguards?
Thank you, Gauri. And yes, Arushi and Alipak, I think, have encapsulated what the legal matrix is today. And Gauri, if you look at it from the perspective that you brought to the table, you are right. We are not today in an ideal world when it comes to intermediary liability. We are not in an ideal world when it comes to freedom of speech and expression, or just in terms of a platform available for speech and expression in the virtual world, particularly qua intermediaries. But we must be very careful that when we benchmark it to an ideal world, we are looking at a situation where the law has actually evolved itself to a situation far more than what we have in terms of the Information Technology Act. But I would, as a litigator, really juxtapose it not to an ideal situation, but to a situation as it existed prior to Section 79 being amended. That's the old 79 that we had under the Information Technology Act. That was even worse. So if you ask me, yes, as a student of law, as a constitutionalist, is it a scenario where there can be an executive order which can actually curtail free speech or in some form or the other chill free speech on grounds of Article 19.2, dehorse a judicial determination, that is, dehorse a court applying its mind? Answer is yes. But the only benchmark is the following. Without Shreya Singhal, for a minute, look at the section in the absence of Shreya Singhal. The section as the parliament actually promulgated it was that if an intermediary has actual knowledge, the intermediary shall pull it down, not really sit in judgment on whether that is prima facie right or wrong. Now, in the context of a defamation case, actual knowledge would mean some third-party individual, that is Sajan Povaya, coming up and issuing notice saying somebody calling Sajan Povaya a bad lawyer is defamatory because to my mind, I am the best lawyer in the world and therefore you, the intermediary, should take it down. Now, that threshold of leniency has actually come down. I think the court did well to read it down to the extent that you must at least have a judicial order, all is well, or at the least have an administrative direction which assumes that the government has applied its mind when passing an order asking you to remove content. And if it has not applied its mind, then of course all principles of arbitrariness, etc., come in, and the intermediary would do well to challenge it. But if you ask me again, do intermediaries challenge these orders? The answer, unfortunately, is no. I think intermediaries are capable of challenging it. They have the wherewithal to challenge it, but they choose not to, for whatever reasons it be.
Sure. So I think just to draw a parallel, when we look at the Delhi High Court order in terms of piracy for Hydra-headed, sort of websites, where they said that, how many times can one, the owner of copyright keep approaching the court? And in fact, I think I think it was Justice Manmohan, if I'm not wrong, in fact says that, there are other jurisdictions where administrative mechanisms have been built, have been established for these purposes. And he goes on to establish some good mechanism, through a court, though a court mechanism, but he has done that. So if you pure, propositions of law versus, some kind of a compromise is something what I hear is your takeaway in the current scheme of things, at least till such time we have a, better solution, if any. Now, coming to the other aspect, which is related to freedom of speech and expression, and what I'm doing now for the members of this panel, for everybody, if you can look at the window, I don't know whether all the attendees are able to see what I have posted in the chat box, but there is a proposed provision under the intermediary guidelines of 2018. I don't know, there may be further revision to this, but at least this is the version available. It requires intermediaries to deploy technology-based automated tools or appropriate mechanism with appropriate controls for proactively identifying and removing or disabling public access to unlawful information and content. Now, here there is first a presumption that everybody knows what is illegal, so that subjectivity is a question mark. Then you deploy the tools, and basis those tools, you are curtailing the freedom of speech and expression. So, at least personally, I feel it is, just going beyond again, to Shreya Singhal's point, because ultimately here also there is a intermediary who's doing determination. So, any thoughts on this point?
No, I'm a free speech lawyer, and if you really ask me, I possibly on this platform not mince words to tell you that there is very little or no application of mine that's gone into in the form that the draft rules have been brought up for discussions. I can't think of myself from a constitutional perspective where you tell an intermediary that you will have an automatic process by which content which is assumed to be unlawful or illegal by an administrative authority should automatically be blocked, which means that there must be proactive monitoring by an intermediary to remove this content or purge this content from the internet. That is complete anathema to Section 79 itself, where you say that to get the safe harbor, you should not choose the recipient, you should not choose the content or modify the content or actually choose the originator of the content. Now, you can't be an intermediary and then have an automated process to say that illegal content should be out, number one. Number two, even technologically, this is anathema. We are today in a world where machine learning and deep learning is still in a form that is not actually mature, number one. Number two, take the case of defamation. I understand when it comes to child pornography, etc., per se, what you see itself may demonstrate that it is illegal, and therefore you have an automatic process. But in the case of defamation, there must be an application of a judicial mind to even determine that it is per se defamatory. So how on earth will you have an automatic process? I believe the automated process clause in the rules came in more out of fear because there were multiple proceedings pending in the Honorable Supreme Court of India and in various high courts on what the intermediaries ought to do when it comes to child pornography, when it comes to rape and gang rape videos, etc. Now, as a pushback to avoiding something that the courts would mandate the union to do or the state to do, the state seems to have passed on the burden, if I can say so, from the state itself to the intermediary. I think it is wrong on two counts. One, constitutional count, where you're asking the intermediary to do this. But more so, it is wrong because you are in a way empowering the intermediary to decide what is unlawful and then have an automated process, which means you are actually choosing what should go on the internet, which is anathema to free speech.
Absolutely. And when we were looking at this provision, this is exactly what we were debating on the child pornography point that you mentioned. So there are these tools, which detect the amount of skin on the screen, or gun presence of a gun or any other sort of device, or some of these specific tools have been developed, which keep evolving. But to mandatorily put it is something versus like more like a self regulation, which intermediaries in any case putting it. So that balance needs to be looked into. But I think the other point that you also mentioned is moderation. I'm slightly digressing here, but this point does come up quite often, that when, and this is something even the courts have looked into, that when suppose an intermediary has its own community standards, and then they are examining the content to ensure that the community standards are being met. I think Justice Pratibha Singh also indirectly in couple of e-commerce related cases has alluded to this, that you need to meet your own guidelines, otherwise you may not be viewed as adhering to the intermediary rules. So when you are doing this monitoring versus a knowledge, because there is a knowledge, luckily the Shreya Singhal has read it down to say that okay, knowledge will be for the purpose of mandatory takedown is only either. But just coming back to the point of when I'm actually doing moderation for my own purpose, that will be distinguished from the moderation which is required under law. And whether, if I'm doing moderation, I know this question is slightly long, but when I'm doing moderation, does it mean I'm diluting my position as an intermediary?
No, you're right, Gauri. I'll answer this question from a slightly unorthodox perspective. When we talk of community standards, we should be very clear that community standards apply in the physical world when we're talking of actions and reactions qua a particular person or a group of persons in a particular location and a particular time frame. But when you look at a global platform and apply community standards, they actually fall foul. Just take an example. Maybe in your community, addressing your mother in singular or addressing your father in singular is really frowned upon. But in my community, parents are addressed in singular and it is not frowned upon. So community standards even within India actually change. Therefore, something which is acceptable to possibly the Kodava community in the south may completely be non-acceptable to the Bengali community in the east, west, or the Gujarati community, or for that matter, the Haryanvi community. With that being the benchmark within a single country, just juxtapose this to a world where you have a global platform where you don't even have, let's say, there are lots of intermediaries who don't have nation specific domains. They have a common domain which applies across all nations. Now, in such a scenario, how on earth are you actually asking an intermediary to determine what is illegal, or even if that determination happens by the state, to then apply an automated process to just purge all content which are even substantially similar? Automatic tools, for example, on the extent of skin, and therefore you pull it down. Again, I'll give you an illustration. You may develop by deep learning and machine learning a tool which says that if you have more than 95% skin in a particular image, I need to take it down. Let's say I will take it down for a domain specific or a country specific domain. But what if therefore a rape video will be taken down? But what if you have a Bhojpuri film in which there is a rape scene which has passed through censorship and therefore can be exhibited in a theater, but then cannot be on YouTube because it has skin, and therefore the automatic tool pulls it down? Is that not free speech? Therefore, I don't think law should be a faithful follower of technology. I don't think law can induce a particular technological threshold by saying you shall have automated processes for removal, and that's where I think the rules fall.
Yeah, I totally agree because I think there are multiple arguments there because something which is right in a particular context, certain word, and used in another context, all these, issues do come up. Uh, I think the point that you mentioned on global standards, I think that is going to be very important, and we are going to come to that point because one of the key interesting decisions that I think the entire community that is looking at is, Baba Ramdev's case. So I'm going to request Alipak to just quickly tell us what happened in that case in terms of global takedown, and I'm going to then come to you, Mr. Puvaya, with several questions because that particular Delhi High Court order raises several questions, and there is a Jan to 2020 order, which is another interesting piece for us to deliberate upon. So first, Alipak, quick synopsis of the order.
Thanks, Gauri. So I think the facts of this case are very important. I think the dispute arose because a book was written on Baba Ramdev and his lifestyle, and subsequently the single judge of Delhi High Court, they issued an injunction order against the author and the publisher. Subsequently, that was taken to Supreme Court as well, and as I understand, the matter is still pending. Now, during the pendency of this matter, the content which had video clippings or information pertaining to that book was published by various intermediaries, and I'm not going to name them. They were all impleaded in a suit before the Delhi High Court. Now, thereafter, many arguments were made. I think the key question was, I think these intermediaries had agreed for geographical blocking of that content within India. I think the key question was whether the platforms can be directed to block the content on a global basis, or would the jurisdiction of Indian court only extend directing blocking in India? A lot of submissions were made. I'll just take 1 minute to summarize one or two of them. I think the plaintiff argued that intermediaries cannot argue on behalf of the content uploader. It is not for the intermediaries to decide what is defamatory, unless it was also argued that unless a global takedown order is granted, the plaintiff will be forced to initiate legal action in different countries, and that would lead to multiplicity of proceedings. Thereafter, the respondents, which included a lot of intermediaries, they argued that this global takedown order will violate Committee of Nations because this case concerned defamation. The law of defamation as is understood may be different. Like, for example, in UK, it is different. In the United States, it is different. Similarly, in various countries, the parameters may be different. So you can't grant a blanket injunction. It was also contended that the plaintiff had taken no steps to identify the content uploader in spite of giving all necessary information. Now, thereafter, the Delhi High Court, they ruled that because the content was uploaded in India, it has to be taken down, blocked, restricted on a global basis. Delhi High Court also observed that in case the content is uploaded outside India, then perhaps in that scenario, blocking could be done only within India. But since in this scenario, the content was within India, uploaded within India, global takedown was justified. And then after the decision was rendered, we understand that an appeal has been filed before the division bench, and the appeal is pending. And the last point would be the 31st January order passed by Justice Endlaw. I think very interestingly, Justice Endlaw has observed that in spite of a long span of time, about 9 to 12 months, the petitioner has taken no steps or not taken the help of the information technology cell of the Delhi police to identify the uploader. And the order discusses all these nuances. There was also an attempt made by the intermediaries to suggest that this global takedown order cannot be justified. There could be similar litigation in the United States and other parts of the world. And then if a negative order is pronounced, that would hit the dignity of the Indian courts. Now, Justice Endlaw dismissed those submissions on the ground that such a occasion had not arisen. Now, with that, I would leave it over here, and maybe Mr. Puvaya can explain further the nuances of this case.
Sure. So before we deal with, the nuances of this case, Mr. Puvaya, if you can just share with us some global cases that have happened I think we discussed a couple of them. So just let us first look at the international trend and then come to the specific case in the context of our legal provision.
Unfortunately, again, I say unfortunate because I come from a particular perspective, pardon me. For me, free speech is paramount. For me, freedom on the internet is paramount. I think you should actually let the web govern itself in a form and manner that it should, barring very egregious matters such as child pornography, etc. And therefore, as a free speech lawyer, I believe that defamation is a wrong threshold to be applied for governing the internet. And unfortunately for us, most cases world over where there have been global removals, etc., have originated from a defamation perspective. Where that is an issue of subjectivity on whether it is indeed justifiable, not justifiable. You have actually a protectable reputation in a particular jurisdiction. And most of these also emanate from interim reliefs that are granted, where you need to take down pending trial. And that's also Swami Ramdev's situation. But yes, globally, the trend has been towards uniform removal. I think the best case we can actually benchmark it to is the dispute between Canada and US in Equestrian, where Google was really asked by a Canadian court right up through the highest court in the land that removal must actually be global, leading to a situation where the court of first instance in a state in the United States of America, they further granted an injunction saying that no, you will not comply with the Canadian order, because if you do so, you will actually be flouting the threshold under the US Constitution. But you have had cases even in the European courts, particularly in the Court of Justice of the European Union, where if you look at the EVA Goldsmith, or if you look at the CNIL case, in both those, one against Facebook, one against Google, you have had a scenario where they have asked for, or at least tilted towards asking for takedown within the European Union, although the law has been indicated and illustrated to mean in the judgment, saying that the law does not per se mandate a removal across the community, that is the European Economic Area or the Union. It only mandates removal in a particular jurisdiction. However, the courts have also gone on to say that if you look at the law independently, it also does not prohibit a removal, which means that courts are now tilting towards global removal, not as a matter of law, but so much as a matter of the court's own power to do so, and then the exercise of power in an appropriate case. So that therefore, I believe that courts globally are determining, one, that they have the power to ask for global removal. Second, that no statute prohibits global removal, therefore the courts have the power. Second, They then apply to an appropriate factual metric saying, does this factual metrics demand a global removal? And if it does, we will pass a global removal. We will not really shirk by saying that a global removal might lead to a potential dispute in terms of committee of courts. That seems to be the trend world over. And Swami Ramdev of the Delhi High Court is, of course, a very bright example for India.
So I think since we are speaking in the context of 19.2, as Arushi had elucidated, there are several grounds that we discuss like sovereignty, security of state, friend relations, public order, decency, contempt, and defamation. So I can see, for example, decency, morality, and defamation at least being very subjective and having different applications or interpretations across different territories. But just before we deal with Baba Ramdev case, just since the point that you mentioned, when it comes to sovereignty issue or security of state issue, will the courts look at it differently? For example, in a Canadian versus US situation, should it have been an issue dealing with some of the security issues, for example, in Canada, because of which the takedown was ordered, and then how the courts look at it in the US? Will the thresholds of acceptance change depending upon the ground on which the takedown had been? I'm talking again more on a practical level, how the courts are likely to view it.
I would think so, and I completely agree with you, Gauri, on that. I think courts will really apply a comparatively lesser threshold in terms of holding back on passing an order when it comes to national security, when it comes to possibly a relationship with friendly relationship with countries, etc. It may also apply a lower threshold when it comes to decency and morality as compared to defamation, because decency and morality, although is more subjective than, for example, national security, but decency and morality can hold a community acceptance in terms of saying decency and morality from a particular societal perspective is then uniform. But defamation is individual specific. It's really not even community standards for defamation. It's whether you are defaming Mr. or Miss X in that particular context. Therefore, I think, yes, the thresholds that the court will apply will be different, and it will actually be in a graded scenario where the lowest threshold may be for possibly for issues which impact the sovereignty of the country. The next graded issue will come to situations like morality or commission of offenses, etc., in terms of prevention. And the last threshold must be defamation. But the problem is, in the last threshold itself, courts are now turning up and saying that you do global removal. So you can well assume what the court will do when it comes to national security.
Right, right. Now let us let us specifically look at now Baba Ramdev case in terms of why did the court exercise jurisdiction and your views on that, because the court relied upon section 75. The court looked at definitions of computer network, etc., and then applied different principles for something which is uploaded from India and then something which is uploaded from outside India, whether even if it's the same content. So, do you agree with the interpretation of not so much, I mean, on the definition points and all, but interpretation of the jurisdictional question that was before the court?
Yes, one, of course, a word of caveat, we are all lawyers, and this matter is sub judice. It's pending adjudication before a division bench, and I'm sure it will walk up all the way to the Supreme Court and maybe in other multiple proceedings in various other high courts. But yes, if you look at it as a student of law, I must say that although I've always litigated on this side of the table for intermediaries trying to limit as much intrusion as possible from the state, from individuals, from courts, etc., etc. But from a practical perspective, I think this judgment has a good deal of positive indications of the law, and therefore I'll take this jurisdiction issue. Whilst the Swami Ramdev decision uses the 75 threshold and uses the threshold of an interconnected environment, and therefore some of the apparatus being in India and the rest of the apparatus being elsewhere, and therefore an Indian court assuming jurisdiction over something that happens on the internet because a system which is jurisdictionally located in India is used, and therefore to say that I can actually give orders which are extraterritorial in nature really need not have been the benchmark. 75 need not have been the benchmark at all. The benchmark simply could have been this, that if a defendant submits himself or herself to the jurisdiction of court and an order passed by court can be complied by the personal obedience of that defendant, irrespective of whether assets, properties, or actions are to be taken outside the jurisdiction of the court or countries, then simply in a civil suit, let alone technology out, in a simple civil suit where property is located outside the jurisdiction or in a foreign territory, but an injunction can be enforced by the personal obedience of the defendant, and defendant is submitting himself or herself to jurisdiction, then under section 16 proviso of the CPC, an Indian court will grant an injunction asking you to or not to do something outside the country. And that has been happening. Let's just for a minute be trial lawyers. That has been happening day in and day out in this country. You will have a city civil court in Bangalore granting an injunction that you shall or shall not do something in Europe because you, the defendant, are here. You are submitting yourself to jurisdiction, and this order can be complied by your personal obedience. Now, please look at Swami Ramdev. All intermediaries across the board submitted themselves to jurisdiction. Not one intermediary challenged the jurisdiction of an Indian court when it came to global removal, saying, sorry, you do not have jurisdiction. They went on the overreach of the court saying, oh, committee, you should not be doing this. It applies outside the territory. I have complied with an Indian order so long as information is not available in India, etc., etc. But the fact is, all of them submitted to jurisdiction. The minute, let us say, intermediary X submitted itself to jurisdiction of a particular court, a civil court, then under section 16 proviso, a civil court has jurisdiction to pass an order. It has gone ahead and passed an order. We will debate on the necessity to pass such an order separately. But on a jurisdiction issue, I think it is an open and shut case.
Right. And the other perspective on 75 also, 75 has a very limited application when it comes to, any offense. Now, there is no offense being committed here because defamation is not an offense under this particular act, right? So it is very, very limited application. That too, when something is being done outside, can there be an implication inside? So I think somewhere I believe, with due respect to the court, somewhere the reliance of 75 has sort of digressed, the argument on the applicability on a jurisdictional point. Now, one can always debate whether, etc., and to your point, whether there can, when somebody is submitted to jurisdiction, I mean, these issues were not sort of, put forth in terms of in that particular order. But reliance on 75 gives a completely different, impression, which I believe now all of us agree here that reliance is as such not probably accurate. And now coming to so Arushi, I would request you to just look at if there are any questions I may be missing, which we need to sort of ask Mr. Puvaya. But now coming to the overall applicability in terms of the difficulty of saying that I am willing to take down my content. I think that is what the court also looked at. So I believe somewhere when they are willing to take down the order for community guidelines perspective or willing to do certain things but not do certain things for other, from a defamation perspective, I believe somewhere do you believe that the stand taken by the intermediaries also, or at least explanation, for example, of the manner in which technology works, because there are certain observations made in the first order as well as the second order. Do you believe there can be more kind of conducive environment in which the entire technological setup or the facts are explained by the technology providers to the court in a better manner? Do you get that impression when you read these orders?
Completely, yes, Gauri, and I think you hit the nail on its head. It's completely correct. I think most times when matters of this nature are argued in a court ecosystem in the country, there is little or no technology that is brought to bear in terms of feasibility, how it operates. There are judges who understand technology. There are judges who don't. There are lawyers who understand technology. There are lawyers who don't. In fact, a vast majority of the judicial ecosystem does not understand how technology works, number one, and more so how the ecosystem on the internet works. And therefore, a lot of these orders emanate from an assumption that how the internet works is actually a replication of the brick and mortar world, but except faster. But that is completely untrue. There are certain assumptions in the brick and mortar system which are ingrained, which just do not apply when it comes to the virtual world. Number one. Number two, this entire scenario of saying that why are you as an intermediary holding a brief for the originator? Why is the originator not coming up and arguing his or her constitutional rights? No, we don't need you to be the flag bearer. Number one. Number two, oh, you, the intermediary, you are after all a foreign company. Why are you coming and telling us how the constitution should be interpreted here? Or number three, oh, you, the intermediary, you are just a commercial entity. Profit motive is the most important thing for you. So you please don't become a flag bearer for free speech. Now, I think all these juxtapositions are wrong. And they come from a particular perspective, and please don't blame the courts for it. They come from that perspective simply because I don't think we as lawyers are actually brought to bear before court what actually an intermediary does or does not do, and how actually an intermediary becomes the genesis for an ecosystem where free speech thrives. Now, unless that is brought to bear, there is a lot of misgiving in why the intermediary fights these battles, number one. Number two. Number three, I think sometimes the intermediaries get this on themselves. There are a lot of matters in which the intermediary can simply win a proposition by saying, I am sorry, I do not operate in your country in terms of a physical establishment. Therefore, I will not submit myself to this jurisdiction. You pass an order, I may comply with that order qua this jurisdiction, but I will not comply with that order qua another jurisdiction, and I will simply not submit. Now, if that is not done, we follow a common law pattern of judicial dispensation, and at best our procedure is only codified common law. Our procedure permits a court in this country to pass an order which has extraterritorial operation the minute you are available in court, and you don't submit to the court's jurisdiction, you don't challenge the court's jurisdiction, but you challenge the merits of the matter in terms of whether an order should or should not be passed. I think that is the problem. And therefore, it is a problem of two kinds. One, not bringing technology to bear before court. Second, even lawyers using their tricks which they use for a brick and mortar litigation to a technology litigation, which unfortunately does not work.
I think I'm going to come back to you on one point which you made very valid in terms of why are intermediaries arguing, and that's something I'm going to ask Arushi as well. But coming to your point on the way the matter could have been explained, because the question here really is that if you see the wording of even, I think there was a discussion about connected computers because it is originating from India, therefore, it has to be taken into account. But if we really see the wording of whether 69A or 79, when it comes to technological, the phrases that have been used. For example, 69A specifically uses the terms such as block access to the public. Now, when you say block access to public, I would interpret this in an Indian law, public in India, because you can't really have that, extraterritorial applicability unless it has been specifically called out, and this act doesn't call out that applicability. That is number one. Number two, in 79 also, it uses the word expeditiously remove or disable access. Now, we have been talking about removal. In this case, so Baba Ramdev case, there was a blocking removal, but I don't believe there was a discussion about disable access. And when there are two interpretations possible, where taking into account whether global applicability, not, etc., been argued that when you say disable access, that also should be within India, because you have two possibilities, either removal or disable access. And in cases of defamation, the more appropriate term to deploy here is disable access to content within India. Any thoughts on that? I mean, could it have been argued in that context?
It could have been, and I think it makes more sense when you look at an intermediary. Let's just look at hypothetically an example of an intermediary which has country-specific domains and an intermediary which does not have country-specific domains.
Right.
When an intermediary does not have country-specific domain, and therefore it's a common platform that applies all over the world, then the disability of content or removing that content for a particular jurisdiction can only happen by logging or actually mapping the IP from which the access is being.
Correct.
That, I think, will be a problem, because when you actually stop the visibility of that content, and I'm using this stopping visibility wantingly because I don't want to use the word disable or remove, stopping the visibility of that content from an IP specific user perspective is neither removal nor disabling content. Therefore, I don't think the letter of Section 79 will be complied. But when an intermediary has country specific domains and the intermediary is willing for that particular country to actually remove or simply disable access to that material on that domain in its entirety, then I don't think a court in India should turn up and say, but you, the intermediary, also have three other domains. Therefore, across your platforms and other domains, you shall remove. That may become an order beyond the jurisdiction. It's not a scenario of order that cannot be passed if there is jurisdiction, but it may become an order beyond jurisdiction. Number one. Number two, just look at the third hypothesis, and I'll be very quick. What if an intermediary establishes a string of subsidiary companies and each subsidiary company manages or takes control of a country specific domain? Then only if that subsidiary submits itself to a jurisdiction of a court and asks and receives an order, it will simply say, yes, I'm submitting. My domain is X. That's all it is. My affiliate who is actually in Scandinavia is not submitting itself to a jurisdiction. So what will you, my lord, the Indian court do? Answer is nothing. An Indian court really cannot then pass an order. The problem also here is, again, don't blame our courts. Our courts are doing what they can do and within the powers that they have. You are an intermediary. You want to make sure that you have this multitude of content available in a single platform. You want a single entity to govern it, and you want that entity to submit itself to jurisdiction all over the world. Then here it is. You have an order. There is very little or nothing you can do to challenge it.
Interesting. I mean, some of these, things will need further debate, but I'm cognizant of the time. So I'm just going to, ask both of you this question, Mr. Puvaya as well as Arushi, on the point that you made, which is very valid, as to why are intermediaries fighting? Are they fighting because, when I say fighting, why do they argue against takedown of a content? Otherwise, they can simply say, I got an order, I'm simply complying with the order and walk away. But they are fighting for certain principles. So, Arushi, any thoughts on why would an intermediary want to argue or defend a particular content which doesn't really concern that entity?
So Gauri, I mean, if you look at the whole concept of a platform, all the platforms that we use, they are built on the principle of free speech, dissemination of information. And to that extent, even though the law provides that, if there is a takedown, the person whose, link or whose content is being removed can go and argue. What is the real ability of that person to go and argue? If I was to receive a notice from MeitY today for my content, even I probably wouldn't show up before the MeitY in the next 48 hours and start arguing. So I believe this is just a measure taken by the intermediaries to protect the sanctity of their platform, where they come forward and try and defend their users. It's not always a case of right or wrong, but it's a question of this is what the principle that ultimately the platform believes in, that people should be able to express their views freely. Now when it touches the aspects of mischievous content, I believe intermediaries are also doing a good job, especially in respect of fake news and in the COVID-like situation, where intermediaries are actively working with the government to make sure that fake news is not disseminated any further. So steps are being taken, just that I think it will still take some time between the government and the intermediaries to set some sort of standard operating protocols where things will happen more quickly.
On what aspect?
My thoughts, and I've been fighting intermediary related litigation now for what, close to 14-15 years. Shreya Singhal, we got lucky in Shreya Singhal. I remember how Shreya Singhal started and how it ended. I think we got absolutely lucky in Shreya Singhal. We had a brilliant bench of Justice Nariman and Justice Chalameshwar who were willing to actually consider how technology works. And therefore, some of those paragraphs in Shreya Singhal on why this millions of requests coming from private citizens should or should not be accepted, and therefore giving that the argument a constitutional color from a 19.2 perspective is, I think, a brilliant analysis. Again, an analysis saying that only that content must be disabled and nothing really more. But please look at it from another perspective. I think an intermediary is fighting this battle not because it is commercially prudent or commercially imprudent. I think the genesis of an intermediary, the genesis of these businesses is freedom on the internet, the freedom to operate. Now, if you tweak that freedom to operate slowly and steadily, there'll be nothing left in terms of a business platform to take it forward. Number one. Number two, and rightly so, I think intermediaries ought to fight these battles because a lone citizen sitting in a far off location, let us say in Pathanamthitta in Kerala, may not have the wherewithal to fight it. Now, please understand, it is not the haves who need the internet actually to disseminate information. The haves have the newspapers and the governments to listen to them. It is the have-nots who have this medium. And therefore, if you look at it from a constitutional scheme in this country, the intermediary is doing actually you, the constitution, a great service. Therefore, they ought to fight the battle. And I think Indian court should not look at that battle as if, why are you the intermediary raising it? On the contrary, as if you are entitled to raise it, and I will meet it from a perspective of constitutionalism. That I think should be the scenario.
Absolutely. I think I think we are now looking at a new intermediary guidelines being that may come out, and some of these principles may not necessarily get addressed in those guidelines because those would be more of practical, within how much time and this, that, and the other. But this very aspect of freedom of speech and expression, and I would look at it more like a public interest litigation, if I may use that, in sort of in that context, because ultimately somebody is fighting for somebody else's right, which concept has already been recognized in the Indian context, that the point that you made, that have nots, somebody needs to voice their, sort of grievances before the court. And probably in that context also, this particular principle has already been accepted, that you need not be wrong, but you are, sort of voicing somebody else's, opinion before the court, and then standing up for that. Because when we even look at Métis orders or otherwise, there is a lot of analysis that intermediaries undertake before, they want to comply or they go for the meetings. And we have seen that effort being by the intermediaries. It's a substantial effort, and I really applaud the kind of work that goes behind, to sort of even do that. Otherwise, if one can simply receive notice and be done with, right? But that is not the approach that we see followed by the intermediaries. So with that, we have couple of minutes left. I'm going to just ask Arushi to sum up in terms of if there are any questions. I'm struggling with my specs. They are not, I can't read that fast with my specs. With the lockdown, I don't have it. So, Arushi, if you can just quickly see if there are any questions, or maybe round it off by giving certain suggestions in terms of the new intermediary guidelines and the amendment to the IT Act that is coming out. We have a couple of minutes. If you can just round that off, that would be.
I'll come to that, Gauri, but I think we have an interesting question. I guess we will use this time to get an answer to that question from Mr. Puvaya. One of the questions basically talk about that, if there's a global takedown order, would the intermediary be liable, considering that, in a digital kind of an environment, you can't always remove the digital footprints, and you have technology like the VPN. You can circumvent certain certain takedowns and certain blockades. So how does one look at it from an intermediary liability perspective in such cases when you have a global takedown sort of an order?
Two things. Again, this is not these propositions are not unknown to Indian law. Even prior to intermediary litigations really coming onto the forefront, these have been applied in the brick and mortar world. The first thing, Indian courts are actually of the lot more reasonable when it comes to compliance with their orders. If you can show that there is a technological restriction or a technological feasibility issue in terms of cleansing the internet completely of this information, that there may be some remnants which will, from a technological perspective, still be available, whether footprints or otherwise, I don't think an Indian court will hold you or haul you up in contempt, number one. Number two, the compliance perspective is really not so much of a trouble, and intermediaries are fighting from a perspective, not that they don't have power to comply, but from a perspective of saying, are you a court in Peru? Forget India. We are all Indian lawyers, Indian citizens. So we are proud about our country, our constitutional heritage, etc., etc. Let me take an example. What if you had an Indian-born intermediary who's doing very well globally, and a court in Peru asked it to remove particular content which the intermediary genuinely believes is ethical content available on the internet? How would an Indian intermediary actually react to a court order from let us say, a province in Peru. Now, that actually changes the whole thing. We do not have common standards. Flag burning is accepted and is an aspect of free speech in the US. Flag burning is an offense in India still. And we are talking of two democratic polities with fantastic constitutions on two ends of the spectrum. Therefore, compliance is really not the problem. The problem is actually tolerating an order which has global ramifications, because a common platform works on different community standards in different parts of the world, yet be a common platform for everybody to actually voice their views.
Right. Thank you so much. And I think I do have another question here, which also is an interesting question, which talks about, what is your view when the content which is objectionable in nature is basically transmitted through private chats? So it's not an intermediary platform per se, but basically maybe like a WhatsApp kind of a forum, which is private in nature. And if the answer changes, if the content is posted or generated by minors. So your views on that, sir?
I'll keep the minors aside and come to that separately. But let's be very clear as technology lawyers. The law makes no distinction between a private platform, public platform, etc. Once an intermediary, always an intermediary, and nothing but an intermediary. Therefore, even end-to-end encrypted closed platforms, those service providers are intermediaries and they are subject to the mandates of the law. I am not talking of encryption now because there are much more to say on arguments of encryption. Is end-to-end encryption even feasible and legally compliant in India, etc. are questions for another day. I would say yes, it is, but somebody may say it is not compliant. I think end-to-end encryption is permissible in this country, but you will still be an intermediary and you will still, assuming there are court orders, you may need to comply. But in a scenario that the technological feasibility comes in an end-to-end encrypted platform, if a court says that you will actually rid the platform of certain content, how will you comply? You yourself as a platform provider do not have access to that material. So how is that you will comply? So it's a scenario of technological feasibility. Nobody can be hauled up for a non-compliance of an order which is technologically not feasible. At the same time, court cannot ask you to do the impossible as well. Now, when it comes to minors, I'll just end by saying, see, minor and content relating to minors, content uploaded by minors or pornographic, etc. related to minors is a very, very crucial issue. And here I don't think any intermediary worth its salt will say, no, they will not comply. The problem of non-compliance is not the problem of lack of intent to comply. It is a problem of not having an institutional mechanism to comply. In the United States of America, you have the NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There is actually a NCMEC VPN. You get the database from them. Every intermediary then says that, okay, we will use photo DNA technology, video DNA technology, whatever we have, and rid our platforms from that pornographic content. Unfortunately, in India, we do not have a common platform available from a governmental perspective or a non-governmental perspective to feed that material to the intermediary to say remove. One odd notice coming from some NGO is not going to make the difference. So I think we should build institutional mechanisms, not just at the governmental level, but also at a non-governmental level, if you really want to rid the internet of unwanted material legally.
Thank you very much. And I think we are slightly above time, but this was a very engaging conversation. We can go on. But I think we have tried to address most of the questions. Some of them, I think Arushi sort of handled on the chat itself. So thanks for that. And really, thank you very much, Mr. Poovaiya, to take out your time late at night. We really appreciate you being with us and sharing your thoughts. I think hereafter, I think it's going to be more of, a conversation among all the intellectuals to figure out the technological aspects, the legal aspects, and practical aspects as well. And I hope there is a good, sort of dialogue that is established among all of us, the government and the intermediaries, so that we find not a perfect probably, but a viable solution. With that, thank you all and have a good night.